Hello, thank you for joining us yet again on In the Stacks by the Sea. We are so happy to have two treasures, homegrown treasures from right here in South Carolina, Ashley Mace Havird and David Havird, wonderful dynamic writing duo. They're coming to us from Louisiana, but they have great ties here to the Palmetto State, and in fact, ties to right here in the Low Country, right here in Murrells Inlet, in fact. So they're coming back to see us again, and they did a wonderful job reading their poems to us at our 13th annual Litchfield Tea and Poetry Series just a few moments ago. So thank you so much for coming back down here to see us in the Low Country, and it's wonderful to have poets of y'all's stature and accomplishments here.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I know folks would like to hear about is your connections to this place, to South Carolina and to the Low Country. Ashley, would you tell us a little bit about that?
The source of my creative energy is landscape, and specifically the landscape of my childhood. I spent on a tobacco farm in Marion County, just west of here, during the late 50s and 1960s. And in fact, I think of my source essentially as a swamp that's swimming with all kinds of weird, random stuff from which I can pull material. And it's not like I'm actually thinking my brain is a swamp. I'm really not. But when I write, somehow I feel as though I pull from that upbringing where I was becoming aware of the details in the landscape, the insects. So I have a lot of bugs in my poems for one thing. Just the bugs and the green stuff growing around the land, the flora and the fauna, whatever. That is the source of that's where my poems are born, and fiction as well. I have the novel, of course, that's set during the Civil Rights era on the tobacco farm Lightning Struck, and that too, of course, its source is that landscape. But I also spent a great deal of time down here at the beach when my grandparents lived. I was very lucky. I had grandparents who lived here, first at Myrtle Beach, then at Surfside. And then later on, my parents had a house at Murrells Inlet. So just being able to spend time down here in this landscape has also made been part of that pool of source material, I guess you'd say. Even when I'm not writing a landscape-based work, landscape-based poems or fiction, it's still where it starts.
Yeah. That lushness of the it's certainly lush down here, and we certainly have a lot of insects. For maybe too many sometimes, but that gets into your work. The novel Lightning Struck, wonderful coming of age story set in the farm basically of your youth in Marion, fictionalized outside Marion, South Carolina, but also in your poems, and so that's a driving creative force, as you noted, behind your work, and you have a very detailed creative imagination when you read your
Thank
work.
you. You mentioned the poem "Turtle and Snake," which I read just now. My father died in the June actually of 2016,
Yes.
and so a couple years ago, and my brothers and I were all able to be on the family farm during the last days, and so after visiting him in hospice, we would gather back on the farm, and I was actually walking behind the house, and just as the poem is actually a true story. I was walking down toward the swamp called Black Gum, and on my left was a turtle just sitting there, and on the right there was a snake, a huge snake, just straight as a stick. And I thought, oh no, the snake's going to get the turtle. So I grabbed the turtle, carried it out into the field, the tall grass of the field, put it down. Then when I came back to the road, saw there was a hole. And I thought, oh, I was so stupid. The turtle was laying eggs. So I went and got the turtle. And because if I'd left it like this, okay, the snake's going to thank me for this and say, great, thanks a lot. So I went and got the turtle, put it back on the nest, hoped I positioned it properly, and continued the walk down to the swamp. In fact, came back and the turtle was still there. The snake was still there. But anyway, that particular event occurring at that particular time turned into a poem, and part of that series about my father's death.
I let go of his hand that stayed curled like a shell. The hand I pretended was holding mine too. Took the dirt road toward the swamp. At the edge of the field, to my left, a turtle. To my right, a snake, 5-footer, stick straight. Cottonmouth, if I wasn't mistaken. Without thinking the thing through, wanting nothing more than to fix, I moved the turtle out into the tall green, then saw in the road the lip of loose sand, the hole, the clutch. The snake, it came to me, I'm a bit slow, was waiting. Why, if it had to, it would wait all day. I set the turtle back, tried to anyhow, the way she had been. I wanted to believe she would blanket her eggs with soft dirt, camouflage the nest, outweight the snake. I walked on, holding my hope like a heavy shell.
And can you tell us how that image, such a striking image about the landscape and on your family land, how did that connect with your father's passing?
We knew he was going to die, but at those times you think, well, maybe not. Maybe not. It's not really going to happen. So even when you know that it is, you still kind of hope for the impossible.
Yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, that hope beyond hope.
Right.
It's a wonderful, moving poem that I think everyone can relate to, and so.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so we know poets tend to be brooding, moody, egocentric. Very.
We're all of
very
those things.
Loners, difficult, very difficult people.
Terribly difficult.
Really awful human beings.
Yeah, the
So
worst.
how is that to be married to each other, since you're both just?
It's rough.
Just. No, it is. It's it's a lot of talent under one roof, and a lot of writing, and a lot of
insecurity under one
yeah,
roof.
sure, yeah. It doesn't. But is this it's been a long time relationship, and you have some wonderful writings about that, but a lifetime collaboration. But how about how does that work out in terms of y'all's writing? Do you help out, or
Would you like to talk now?
David? Yeah, David.
Well, I mean, Ashley is my first reader. So, if
And vice versa.
when I have a poem ready to show somebody, she's the one that I show it to. And she criticizes, and I get mad, and
Always.
then I make the changes, and
Then it's better.
and then it's better, yeah.
And then he thanks me.
And then I thank her, that's right. And the same thing is true with, with the prose that I've done. She's a very good critic. And then she does the same. I mean, I'm her first reader, but she doesn't get mad.
Oh, that's,
No, I'm grateful for the criticism.
I get mad, she doesn't get
I
mad.
never get mad. But he's an incredible reader. He's a fantastic editor and critic. And so I always appreciate his feedback. And of course, he read the novel, 3 or 4 times?
yeah.
And spent tons and tons of time helping me edit that book.
Yeah, so
Yeah, I
It's a
mean,
big
you
deal.
know,
And the
it
built-in
sounds
editor.
cheesy to
Yes.
say, but the work on the novel was a sort of second courtship,
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really fun.
a revision as courtship. Yeah.
So it sounds like a wonderful collaboration. Not without, I guess the course of true love, that never doth run smooth. So there's some bumps and bruises, but it is running. It's still running.
It's still going. Yeah.
And the same thing with your writing. And David, you write some great love poems. I mean, that is a subject of your art as well. Among other subjects, would you like to pick one of the poems that you read today and take us through the process of how you came through it?
Yeah. Which one would you like to hear?
Well, I could. I liked molting. Sounded great. But I don't know if that's.
Molting is so. That's a poem that I wrote after my poem came out, and after that book came out, I thought that I don't know how consciously I thought about it, but I was aware of wanting to try some different things, and so I wanted to write some very short poems, which I tried to do. And then I had these sort of longer ideas, sort of that I thought, well, maybe I could write some longer, sort of looser, more conversational poems. And I tried that, and Molting was one of the first ones that I wrote. And I remember very clearly, I told Ashley, I was telling Ashley the story at dinner. We were sitting out on the porch. We eat dinner on the screen porch for as long as we can stand the heat, and then when the season changes, for as long as we can stand the cool. And I told her the story, and she said, well, that's a poem, why don't you write it down? And so I did. I mean, I wrote it out just more or less the way I had told it to her, and then, massaged it, but I wanted to write something that was, looser and than some of the things that I had been doing. And but it's everything in it is true except that Ashley was not singing at Myrtle Beach; she was singing at Merle's Inlet. But I figured nobody had heard of Merle's Inlet, so I put. And Myrtle Beach, I think, maybe rhythmically worked better.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Took some poetic license.
Yes,
That's
that's
all
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before dawn even, zipping past the exit to Myrtle Beach. That's where my girlfriend was, who had a summer job there singing. But I was heading north to see Janet. Hot and muggy, the weather changed at Richmond to rainy, not with a torrent of blades, but a drizzle of pins and chilly. I had to borrow a flannel shirt from Janet, a man's which fit me. Janet was renting along with her college roommate and one other girl a townhouse in Georgetown. Sometimes while they were at work, I'd venture afield to a gallery, Corcoran, Phillips. Mostly I browsed the neighborhood bookstores and otherwise loitered. I had to ask the girls, because I was getting so many probing looks from guys, if maybe I had an effeminate manner. You have, she said, the matronly one whose name escapes me, just a nice face. I slept on the living room sofa, sunburned, itching like mad. I'd scroll the peeling skin off my shoulders and roll it up into a little ball and flick it. Overhead, the women were getting ready for bed, their heels conveying thunder, while I read by lamplight a poem in Harper's by Robert Penn Warren, whom Janet and I and her housemate Felicia had met. A problem of spatial composition, in which a hawk, like something divine, unseen above a window-framed vista composed of a stone scarp and forest, at sunset enters the frame as if from forever, only to go in an eye blink. My wife, who was then my girlfriend, who sang at the beach where noontide had blistered my shoulders, my wife says it's all about sex. Not Warren's poem, this story of mine. The thunder, having slung flimsy bras across the shower rod, puts up its feet, the women nesting. Molting, I clasp the neck of that shirt, whoever's it is, which I will shake out in the morning. The weather whistles past windowsills and under the door, and though it sings like blades cold steel, I picture within the lamplight's moon on the ceiling a hawk whose shrills are high noons killing rays.
So, and it's not just all about sex.
Actually,
someone is charged.
Actually, I think it's, what do I think it's about? I think it's about, well, you know, I think that the image at the end is the ecstasy of Saint Teresa. I think it's about, I think it's about sexual frustration or
I was right.
chastity or something like that, and chastity as ecstasy. Or the image is. Do you know Richard Eberhardt's poem, The Groundhog? You know, where he says, "I thought of China and of Greece, of Alexander in his tent, of Montaigne in his tower, of Saint Teresa in her wild lament." Well, my image at the end is Saint Teresa in her wild lament. David as Saint Teresa in his wild lament. Somebody read the poem, a student of mine, former student of mine, read the poem and thought that it was a wonderful poem about fidelity. Yes.
Okay.
Open to interpretation.
Well, I suppose it is. I mean, not necessarily a wonderful poem, but I think that's probably what it's about.
Yeah, but it has that well, both your works, they're lyrical, but they also have narrative, that, you know, and a wonderful narrative arc to them. That one's particularly conversational, as you were noting, but you both have the storytelling gene. And I was talking with Josephine Humphreys earlier today, and she made a sort of casual and hyperbolic statement that to be a writer, well, you'd have to be a Southerner, you know, but she just meant that, you know, we have this knack for storytelling, and that's kind of how we talk a lot of the time. But that does seem to be, there seems to be, even in poetry in the South, that we do tend to tell a lot of stories, more than maybe some other regions that are more, more image-based, I guess. Or
Well, when I was a kid, really very young, I got Robert Frost's poems through Book of the Month Club. My mother let me join Book of the Month Club. You could get 3 books for $1, and that was one of them. And so I also had, or friends of ours did, a record of Frost reading, and I would lie in front of the stereo, the hi-fi, and listen to Frost reading the poems. And I thought that poems were supposed to be, little stories. And then when I got into college, the first poet that really excited me that I read, actually as a first semester freshman, was John Crow Ransom. And Ransom wrote these little narrative poems with characters in them. And around the same time, I got interested in Robert Penn Warren. Well, there again, you've got these story poems. And Alan Tate came to the university when I was there. And, I thought The Swimmers was just about the greatest poem I'd ever read. A story poem about remembering something from childhood. And then James Dickey, of course, was at the university, and he wrote what he later disparaged as versified anecdotes, but he wrote story poems. And so I wish that I could, my favorite poet, I think, is Thomas Hardy, who also can sometimes get bogged down in narrative, but he writes these little, very tiny poems that have a little dramatic moment. But he can capture that moment so beautifully. I can't do that. I wish I could write those poems, but I can't do it. So you've got the stories instead.
Yeah, and it may not, you quoted the ultimate, New England poet, Robert Frost, so it may not just be a Southern thing, but, although he was named, his middle name was Lee, after Robert E. Lee, and he was born in San Francisco, right. Y'all certainly can spin a yarn in your work, and it's something good to hear. How about you're both you raised a daughter, and
Yes.
your parents. How would you compare parenting to that creative activity to writing?
It's always a story.
And a false start.
Always revision.
A lot of revision.
It's never too late.
Yeah.
A lot of revision and still working.
Rough
It's
drafts.
kind of like poems that are never finished. You're always working on a poem. You just quit, but we haven't really quit. So
Yeah.
Maybe much to our daughter's consternation,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
So maybe if we had 7 children, it would be different. But the one, there's a lot of pressure. So
Yes.
poor thing.
Yeah. Well,
She gets it.
it's your masterpiece.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
We were so thrilled to have y'all back home again,
Thank you.
and this was y'all just did a fantastic reading, and we'd love to have you back again. I know y'all
Thank
get to
you.
enjoy the coast, your
We
beach.
love to be here.
These poems that you read, you did such a fine job of talking about these landscapes right in the local area, and I think it really, you fired up some imaginations out there and really connected with folks.
Come inside.